Everyone to today's webinar, Blockchain Detangled 2.0, Making a Case for Registrar Adoption, which will be presented today by Helen Garrett out of the University of Washington. And a quick note on her, Helen is the University Registrar and Chief Officer of Enrollment Information Services at the U of W. Helen joined the university in February 2016 as the inaugural University Registrar and Chief Officer of Enrollment Information Services. She brought an extensive background in admissions, registration, student affairs, and enrollment management systems from Lane Community College in Oregon, the University of Oregon, Whittier College, University of Southern California, and Michigan State University. In her new capacity as the liaison to the UW Information Technology for Enrollment Management, she led teams to implement a preferred names policy and practice and launch the enrollment confirmation system. Helen has served as president of the Pacific Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, currently serves on the ACRO Federal Compliance Committee and the ACRO Lumina Grant Data Integrations Workgroup, and has held additional leadership positions in state, regional, and national professional organizations. Helen is a national trainer on FERPA and presents at conferences on issues related to professional development. Helen holds a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration and a Master of Arts in College and University Administration from Michigan State University, and a Doctorate in Education from Oregon State University's Community College Leadership Program. So without further ado, here is Helen Garrett to talk to you all about blockchain.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everybody. Welcome to those of you that are joining us live, and if you're watching this later on a recording, thank you for being here too. So we are calling this 2.0 as a webinar because it follows the first webinar I did on this topic on blockchain in June of 2018, and the intention there was just to simply share my journey and my 2-year journey to understand blockchain. So those that attended said, "Nice story, Helen, what is blockchain?" So I took note of that and retooled this session for the ACRO Tech and Transfer Conference by really researching blockchain as best as I could and trying to find a way to explain it so that there would be some sense of understanding this. In August of last year, I was asked to present this to all of our software and engineers in UWIT, very daunting, intimidating, who wanted me to make a case for why registrars would want blockchain. And that was a really pivotal moment because it got me to focus in on what we're really going to talk about today. Why would we as a registrar profession want to embrace this? So for those of you who have attended my sessions in person or webinars before, do know that there's some recycled content, so bear with me on that one. But again, I really am doing this not so much to teach people blockchain, but to really make a case for why we should care. And so my final disclaimer is I'm not teaching the data science behind it so that you can go out and code your own blockchain. It's really just to reaffirm why would we want to have this technology. So let's think about those of us that are in the registrar profession, and I see a lot of you attending are, why am I reaching out and so much wanting my peeps, the registrars, to consider this? Well, when we go to registrar camp or school, we learn about our sacred profession, and as you can see, it goes back to 1500 at University of Bologna, where faculty were teaching, and they realized that they wanted to have some way to keep track of the assessment and who the students were. So they went out and said, hey, we need a registrar, and they made a registrar. So the reason why I have this slide is if you think about it going all the way back to our roots of being a registrar and probably the first custodian of educational records, if we can embrace and trust this technology, I think just about anybody can. So that's why the particular focus on the registrar profession. One of my favorite YouTube videos, and I've watched over 50 hours of them, and I've got a reference to this one later on in the deck, by Richie Atwaru, is introduced this idea of why this is so revolutionary. So I want to share that he talks about in the 1400s, when information was verbal and it was just passed on orally, the printing press was a huge innovation because suddenly you could make materials and information out to the masses. Then when we came into the 1800s, when we were using horse and buggies and candlelight, as we started to have engines and technology, we were able to do our work more efficiently. And again, it had a huge cultural and technical impact on how we do our work and live our lives. He talks about in the 1900s, which is the distance gap in terms of how do we make sure that people around the globe, around the world, are accessing information. Well, clearly the internet is what brought us to that. So he suggests that we are now in a new age that we haven't been in for a while called the trust gap in the 2000s. And this is where blockchain is coming in. So with so much information swirling around and so many people being able to fake credentials and information, we have to have a technology to help ward against this, and that's exactly what we propose, and he does, the blockchain is going to do for us. So what isn't working right now in the credential validation space? And when I say credentials for the point of this webinar, I'm mostly talking about diplomas and transcripts, but we could talk about at community colleges or continuing education programs certificates, and hopefully down the road talking about comprehensive learner records. But I don't know about you, but we don't have enough team members. We don't have enough staff to validate the credentials as it stands. We lean very heavily on our partner with the National Student Clearinghouse, thank goodness. But I only have 4 program assistants to serve 410,000 alumni wanting their transcripts for the diplomas and serving 57,000 students. It's just, we just don't have enough to make it happen. Plus, as much as we love and value the National Student Clearinghouse, they don't have all of our records, things that are microfilm before we start setting records, in between quarter or term gaps, those who don't have SSN. So we do have to still respond to a lot that come through. And the number one point is there are just too many employers and institutions. And by the way, statistics show that the number one consumer of transcripts are other institutions. They're just not validating the credentials. They just take it for granted that they're real. And that's really the space that we're in right now that I think we're kind of at a crisis point. So I want to share a classic story with you that happened last June, right when I was doing these things last summer. And I'd like to say that this is an edge case, but unfortunately we have 3 to 5 of these a week. I just told some executive leadership that at UW, and their mouths held open. And those are the only ones that we know about, where somehow we find out that someone has faked a diploma or a transcript. 3 to 5 a week, hence the reason for blockchain. So let me share this story that happened to us. So we had a student, a former student, applying for an extremely high level position at a company that if I said it, you would recognize. And so they indicated that they had a bachelor in engineering and a master's in mechanical engineering from the University of Washington. So the employer did as we asked, and they went out to clearinghouse to validate. So they had the bachelor's, but no master's. So instead of coming to us, they went, meaning it was fake. There was no record of a master's. So they went back to the applicant and said, hey, we're not seeing the waiver master's at the clearinghouse. And she was like, oh, no problem. I've got a copy of my diploma. Let me get it to you. Mistake number 1. So she sends off this diploma, and you can see how badly done the edit is. She used a little tilde to even get rid of the rest of the word bachelor's. And luckily, and this is what I'm worried about those who don't, luckily the company went, this seems kind of weird. Why isn't the UW validating it? Again, so it was a fake. But they didn't come back to us. They went back to the applicant. And she said, oh, I don't know. That's really weird. Let me get you my transcript. So she produced her transcript and not only fabricated an entire master's degree in mechanical engineering, but went ahead and changed her grades for her bachelor's. So fortunately for us, and this is what I worry about, again, a fake, that are they coming to us? Fortunately, at this point, the company contacted us and said, something's weird here. And I got a call from the Chief Human Resources Officer. And I said, I have to tell you, the student does not have a master's in engineering and actually went back and faked all of the documents, including the undergraduate. And boy, were they happy for that. But I have to tell you that if we had had blockchain in place, as I'm about to propose, none of this would have happened. The employer receiving out of those documents could have gone in and validated if they were real or not, and so that could have cured all of our woes in this. So again, I wish I could say this was just some edge case story, but it's something that happens all the time, at least for us here at the University of Washington. And you really need to think about that it hurts our brand, right, that if people are faking. So fake diplomas and transcripts, they're a click away. People are using incredible graphic design. The fact that this individual could even find the font from our computers that are still using 1983 technology is amazing. But it's not hard to fake on your own diplomas or transcripts. And there is a booming industry of the diploma mills. You could go out there and buy any diplomas from just about any place, And I, quite frankly, want to put them out of business. I celebrate the day that blockchain is here and they simply can't do their work. So getting back to what I had started to talk about was because it was so arduous for me to spend those 2 years just simply trying to find what is this thing everyone's talking about with blockchain. I just wanted to share just a couple of thoughts there just on this one slide of what I came across. So as I started to understand and appreciate what blockchain might mean for me as a registrar, I remembered in 2004 in Eugene, Oregon, being on the sidelines at a soccer practice and seeing a mom, Tammy, come up with this blue thing on her arm and a headset and earphones. And I'm like, what is that? And she said, it's an iPod. I'm like, what is that? She said, it downloads your music and you can listen to it anywhere. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I'll tell you, in that moment, I knew I was going to want one. I didn't know how it worked, but I knew it was going to be important. And I didn't have one for 4 more years, but then pretty much everyone had one. I feel the same way about blockchain. I have no idea really what anybody's talking about, how it works. I just know enough to know I want one. I want an iPod. I want blockchain. And as I went to presentation after presentation to try to understand what everyone was talking about with such ease about blockchain, it took a colleague from Stanford who actually described this concept of a key with this hash code that I'm going to talk a lot about. And basically the idea is that the learner or the graduate gives the key to whoever they want, whether they're looking at the credential or not, that can then come back into the website, and that key has to exactly match, if you will, the lock, which is the hash code to open up and validate the record. So that concept, because I'm so visual and I love metaphors so much, really I'm like, okay, I'm getting this. And I got to my My Fair Lady moment, like, by Jove, I think I've got it. But what I want to be really honest with you all so that you don't get frustrated that I'm not teaching how to code blockchain is I know enough that I know, like, if you remember back when you first got Siri and you didn't really understand about Siri and GPS, but now you can't imagine not having it and the trust that goes into that's going to get you somewhere, that's where I am with blockchain. Don't need to know how and why it works. There are data scientists that do that, but I know and value it enough to have it. And that's where I hope you'll be with me by the end of this hour. So I've been really privileged to be a part of, as Mike said, the ACRO Lumina Foundation grant, where we're looking at building a comprehensive learner record, whether it's validated by institutions or self-provided by the talent or the learners. And in that process, had an opportunity to hear from Scott at University of Chicago, who really pointed out some things I want to make sure that I share with you. One, any new technology like blockchain can invoke fear. Mostly what I hear is just, I feel so stupid. I mean, my parents keep trying to understand this because they see me talking about it so much. So people don't like to look stupid or feel like they're ostracized or old or they don't understand the technology. A fear that this is going to replace computers and jobs. We won't need people to produce transcripts or to sell transcripts to be there. Not true. There's a fear of access and equity. There are many small schools and schools that don't have robust IT shops. And even though mine is huge, we still have no money. Who's going to bring this up and how are we going to scale it so everybody gets to participate in the process? And so just that thought of like, what if we can't make this happen and we're left behind? The second thing that Scott said that just sang to me was, why do we trust humans over smart math with blockchain to validate our credentials? Because we as humans can look the other way, we can enter in the wrong number, we can make a mistake, we can be nefarious and wanting to do wrong. But documents and credentials are defrauded every day in our business, and I would say not by machines or computers, but by humans. And then the other thing is the computer doesn't care. It either is validated or it's not, and it also works nights, weekends, and holidays. It just will be plunking along 24/7 doing the work that we need. Just want to lend those thoughts to you. One of my favorite researchers is an MBA professor that you've probably heard of, Dr. Clayton Christensen from Harvard MBA program, talking about disruptive innovation, and boy is blockchain that. It is a product that is going to come along and it's going to make our work cheaper, simpler, smaller, more convenient to use. And if you look at some of these graphics, the microwave, Siri, Fitbit, Uber, these are things that we didn't know about once upon a time, and now we almost can't imagine not having them. But they're still disruptive. Again, it causes people fear. It makes people worry about how is it going to work. So I just want to own up that blockchain is absolutely a disruptive innovation. I'm hoping, by the time I retire 20, 30 years from now, everyone's going to be like, oh, there was a time you were worried about blockchain. Why? Just like we might think about some of the graphics that we have there below. So let's go over some key concepts associated with blockchain. And these are things that just help me to, again, frame what is this whole thing about. So the big three are really, it's a validation process. And I'm going to talk about using digital signatures to validate that, yes, this record belongs to the student who is trying to let you validate it, and that it's a real and genuine record. The idea of safeguarding, and that we're using that clever math on a distributed network to make sure that everyone can go in and validate that equally, and that we can preserve the transactions and the new records that are adding to the block, and I'm going to talk a lot about this. So there's on a network, so there's no single point of failure. So whenever people are in an elevator with me and want to know what blockchain is, this is what I say. It can be in a public or private network, and it uses clever math to validate all the records that are in a chain of records. That could be a transcript, it could be a house title, it could be bank records, to make sure that none of them have been amended or infiltrated by someone other than the one that's writing that document. And that it's a way to make sure that nowhere along the line was there a break, that someone inserted a fake grade or took out a quarter that they didn't want people to see. So some important terms, and this came from my friend Sue at University of Minnesota, just to think about is this concept of hash. Sometimes it's called hash code. There's a fancy word, cryptographic hash function. This is a unique number, alphanumeric number that's generated, and it's baked into each block or each record along the chain. And it is that key that when someone enters in that number in, has to match exactly to validate that the record is correct. A Merkle tree, I'm not going to stress about that, but it's just a combination of these hashtags. This is a term to know. Blocks, that each block is a record that describes the groups of transaction. And this is why I love this so much for our business, because we do work with blocks if you think of semesters or quarters or terms. So for us, a new block would be every time someone enrolls and has new academic history and or there's any change made to the transcript as it's moving along. And so in the idea of blockchain, every time there's a new record because something has been changed or added, a new block is added, and the chain is the connectivity between all of those blocks and there's records. And the most important thing is that they're in order, and I'm going to talk about this with some of my metaphors, by date and time, so you can't unorder them, because disordering them would indicate that maybe someone had messed with it. So just some key concepts to think about. So when after I wonderfully did that first webinar where people were like, nice story with blockchain, I went and found this book, and I cannot recommend it to you enough. You will not know how to code and know the data science behind blockchain, because I don't think you need that. But if you're like me, that if you learn and resonate to metaphors, I hope you do because you're about to get a bunch of them, it was a very respectful text to help me get through and just also understand what this is about. So what I'm going to do now is just share a whole lot of metaphors that came out of this, and I give a reference at the end that you can go look at that really just help me understand the key. I'm going to sound repetitive purposely because it really comes down to it's a pretty simple process, kind of like teaching FERPA, of just some basic things to know. So bear with me if I sound like I'm repeating myself, but the point is I think at the end of this, you'll also be able to talk about why blockchain could be important for our industry. So I mentioned before about if you can remember before you had your first smartphone and you had no idea what apps were or Siri or anything like that. The truth is, just like with a cell phone today, there are parts that we need to know and parts we don't need to know to value and use it. And the same thing with blockchain. We have to know about that there's an application to take photos, but I don't have to worry about that some science makes the pixels work. I need to know there's a functionality that does take those photos, but I don't have to know how it's making the graphics beautiful. We also want to make sure in any system that there's integrity, that my phone is working as desired, and Siri and GPS are not driving me off a bridge, and also that it's my phone and I can use my thumbprint or my face or however to code to get into it. So this is the same thing the blockchain will be for us. It's a tool just to be able to validate all of our credentials that we're familiar with, but we don't have to know why and how it works the way it does. The next metaphor he talks about is the difference between a diesel and a gasoline engine, which I have no idea, but I understand what he's saying, which is diesel performs very different than gasoline and has its own purpose and its own vehicles depending what you're trying to do. When you're talking about major architectural approaches for software, it's the same thing. It can be a centralized, closed system that's unto itself. Think of like your SIS system that's only there at your school, or it can be distributed. So you're going to hear me talk about that with blockchain. It's very much a distributed process. So you have multiple computers that are all out there, or they're called nodes on the network that are working together. And the more computers you have, the more computing power to more quickly go through and come up with that hash code and match it to say, yes, this is a valid record. By having a distributed network and more nodes on the network, there's not a single point of failure, and there's coordination. Now, we as registrars, we love that because we love our ACROs and our PACROs and our CROs, and we're used to trusting our other schools, so that should feel really natural. And the computers are the ones that are communicating with each other on the network, again, 24/7. They don't take off holidays and sick leave. So the purpose of blockchain, again, is to achieve and maintain integrity in distributed systems. And like I said, it is all about validating credentials. And oh my gosh, that's what I mostly do for a living, besides trying to be a lawyer and a data scientist in other ways. So again, I hope that this just resonates to you. Another metaphor he talks about, this is a little bit older reference, but this idea of Napster, or you can even think of iTunes, that when we suddenly could go out and download our own CDs or download our own music, we didn't have to walk into a CD or a record store to get that music anymore. So what happened in that moment, my friend Mark McConaughey is the first one that taught me this term, is the idea of disintermediation. So that you have these middlemen or middle things that we're not going to need anymore. So whether it's banks, title companies, DMVs, passport office, registrar's offices maybe, you don't have to go someplace anymore to have someone else validate something. By using blockchain, you can just do that. And I know we've got a lot of our fabulous partners listening in either live or in the recording, and thank you for being our partners. I've listed some of them there. They're not going to not be our partners, but we can imagine that there could be new and different ways that the learner or the student could be more quickly and more easily validating their credentials in a way different from what we're doing now. So really, again, that excitement is about having to have the integrity of purely distributed peer-to-peer systems. And we think this will probably completely change the way I do our work, and I just want to be ready for that. So it's going to be faster and cheaper, like Dr. Christensen said. Some people are worried about, will we lose our ability to charge for transcripts? I'm going to come back to that later. So don't worry about that, but that is something people worry about. Again, will eradicate the need for us to sell, and that's not the case. Pages in the book. This is another one that I really liked. So the blockchain blocks that I talked about, if you see my hands, it's like sequentially moving up a chain, are like in a book that they have to be in the same order. So if you're reading your favorite Harry Potter book and you come across, you're on page 199 and all of a sudden it's page 204, you're like, where are the missing pages? It's the same thing in a block. It's impossible to have missing pages because instead of removing records or inserting records, whenever there's anything that's changed in the series of the documents, there's just a new record that's added, and it has the hash code from the record before it and its own hash code, but it has to be sequential. So if you think again about transcripts, that we wouldn't have a situation where someone is replicating their own transcript and just taking out a year's worth that they didn't want to be seen, that couldn't happen in blockchain because you can't go back and take out those pages in the book. This is ownership is super key, right? And so what we're trying to do, I know, with the comprehensive learner record, with Lumina and ACRO, is really start to think differently, and this is hard for a lot of registrars. The records belong to the student or the learner. They don't belong to us. We're but the wonderful custodians. So this idea of ownership is really important, and the metaphor he uses, if you have an apple in your purse and then you run into a store to buy more food, and the cashier sees the apple, they're like, hey, did you steal that? You're like, no, it's my apple. How can I prove that? That's one of the things that blockchain will take care of, is because of the authentication and the signatures and the hash codes and all the blah-de-blah how it works, you won't be in a situation where you won't definitely know who that information belongs to or not. So it talks a lot about as soon as the ownership of the document is transferred from one person to another, all the ledgers are updated with the latest version of the document. This might not be so much relevant to us in terms of transcripts and degrees because that doesn't change a lot. but I just am moving into a new house tomorrow, and I had to sign a 45-page lease in my rental agreement. So I'm a new leasee of this house, so all the records associated with this house now have to be updated to have me as the one renting and not the previous people. In the blockchain world, as soon as that happens and I've been added on, it goes out and updates all the records out there among all the nodes, so everybody has the most current document there. The one thing that is really important to understand is that I'm going to say this a number of times, our records in terms of our actual SIS documents are not out on the network. It's just the transactions that are being updated there. And then also, it's always going to be the most current, what I call the top record in the blockchain that's being validated. So if someone received a transcript, and in the meantime, the student graduated or there's a grade change, and that person was using blockchain to come in and try to validate because they got the key from the student, it would go red or say no because it's not validating to the hash code that's in the top record. So again, music to our ears as registrars that when we're making grade changes or any amendments to our records, or you could see this working with behavioral or conduct, that if someone, I love this for the idea of having conduct notations on transcripts because that whole thing scares me, that instead of worrying that there's this transcript out there that someone was dismissed, but then it's been cleared, if we're using blockchain, you won't have to worry about that because as long as the top record showed that the individual is no longer in a conduct violation, that is what would be presented and validated. Relay race is another metaphor, and basically the blocks on the chain are like in a relay race that you've got to be able to pass off the information to the next. And so you've got to keep it moving along. So again, the whole history of the transactions from the first moment that the student enrolled, building where we brought in their AP credits and where they went to school and their GPA, that starts for us the transcript, but that would stop at the block. And as soon as they register or add academic history, it just keeps handing off those and adding the blocks on top of that. So again, when information is changed, it's not deleted or removed down within the block. There's a new block that's added on to that. And the block always has the information from the blocks below and the hash code that goes with it. Again, I'm going to say this for a second time. All the transactions related to student academic history that we so carefully custodian over in our SIS systems do not exist on the blockchain. It's just the transaction and that there's been a change in the current document. So all of our credentials, the students' diplomas and information academic history, think of FERPA, are safe and sound in our institutional SISs. But when we make those changes in our home systems, we're going to have to, whatever the magic data science is, write that out to the blockchain so that when someone came in to validate, has anything changed since the last time someone went to validate the degree or the transcript, is there a new record? So the record owner is the student, and they arrange with the source owner, which is us, to transfer access to the data to another entity. So again, it means that usually those that are wanting, like in my story before, if they had that fake diploma or that fake transcript, they would use this process to go in and it would say the key you've been given doesn't match because it's not legitimate, it doesn't match to what's up there. In terms of like in that case, it would say no, she doesn't have a master's in mechanical engineering. There's another concept of digital fingerprints. We hear the word crypto hash functions again. So in the process of the computers being brilliant little blockchain data scientists that they are, every time a new record is created, there's this hash code that's created. You can see one I made called like where ACRO, and it's the data, but then it's converted over to this hash code. And so hash values don't describe the data any more than a fingerprint describes a person. I love that metaphor. So a fingerprint says, yes, I am Helen Garrett, so open up my phone, but it doesn't describe that I'm wearing a blue skirt today and I have blonde hair. Same thing with hash codes. They don't describe the data. They're just saying, yes, this is accurate, belongs to the learner, and it's the most recent record. So that hash function that I learned about from my colleague at Stanford, that key, that hash code is baked into each block, and then the next block has that old hash code, and then it's new. And so that's what helps with the sequencing and the date stamp owner, and to make sure that when someone goes in to validate, that their hash code matches the top record, the most current record on the chain, so they can know that nothing has been altered or changed. So blockchain's goal is to determine whether data has been changed after sending it to someone or is stored. This is why we want this. It is exactly why we want blockchain, so that we can put the diploma mills out of business and stop worrying about people creating fake credentials. So I'm going to say this a couple times, but here's how I imagine that it would work. You as an institution would issue a credential key. You could sell it or you could give it away to a student, and it has that code, that hash function. The recipient then can open up and validate their own credentials, and it has to match. But they could also turn it over to an employer, to another institution, who would go into our website and key in that hash code, and it would say, yep, this person does have a diploma and a degree in mechanical engineering, you're good to go, or not. If it's a broken hash or it doesn't work, it's going to go, and it's going to reject it. And that's what we want, because that would make sure that people are not doing it. We will still have reasons to our valuable colleagues listening in from places that do transcripts. We'll still have a reason to buy transcripts and sell them so that people can be looking at the transcript for transfer articulation. But what a cool way to make sure that whether you're an institution using it, that are there any behavioral issues, has there been change, that you can go in and validate that in the process. It also talks about this idea of a reverse mailbox. So the idea right now with a mailbox is the mail comes in, but the only one that can get it is me who has the key. In blockchain world, it's the opposite. You give the key to whoever you want to have access to come in and validate, and then they use that same key to go in and validate the information. So cryptography is the science behind creating those hash codes, and their job is to protect the data from being unauthorized for the wrong people, so that, again, students aren't going to have to worry that someone else is getting access to their records. So the idea of locking down the data is called encryption, and opening is called decryption. And then they're suggesting that you want to do this asymmetric cryptography. That means that the same ciphertext that created is not the same one that opened it up, blah, blah, blah. What does that mean for us? So it means that we as institutions would want to make sure that we, the institutions, are the only ones that are updating the credentials, changing grades, adding degrees, putting on behavior valid, annotations or not, conduct. But the student can provide that key to anyone they want to go in and be able to validate. It doesn't mean that they turn the key over to mom, who can then go in and see their transcript. It just means that the mom could go in and either validate that, yes, the transcript that they have is the most current and matches, or that there's been a change, but only if the student has given that permission by giving the key. So keys, we've been talking about keys a lot, but there's an important idea of public to private or private to public. So again, kind of going back to that mailbox metaphor, public to private, anyone can put letters in their mailbox so only the owner can open it. Private to public, which we're suggesting we would want to do, is only the owner, us, can create the data, put the mail in the mailbox, but anyone with the key can access it. So an important concept there too. Signatures, long ago, back when I was a baby registrar, we still had wet signatures as they call it, and those are long gone. But we are familiar with the idea of needing a signature. A signature is just to prove that this is Helen trying to provide access to Helen's record and not someone else. So those are digital signatures going back to that hash code. And again, it's allowing us to match those hash codes to the blocks and make sure that it is the same record of the student, and then they have a right to get in there. Now, those of you that remember library card catalogs, which I remember well from my early days in Michigan, which was this wooden thing that had cards in it, and so that you could go out and find a book. Well, blockchain creates a virtual catalog, and what it does is it maintains the order of the documents, and then it can reference the blocks of information in the subsequent blocks. So what he says is the card is the block header in our blockchain. The whole catalog represents the chain of block headers, and the content of the book is the transaction data. So again, just like you don't have the content of a book on a card catalog, but you'd be able to find it and know that it's the right book, it's the same thing with blockchain. Our data is not out on the blockchain, but just to be able to validate that it's real and accurate, and that it belongs to the student is out there. This is my favorite metaphor, and if I only have, 5 minutes in an Uber to tell my Uber driver about blockchain, this is what I talk about. This is the idea of knitting, and I failed miserably at this, as my Nana will tell you. But I do know enough about knitting that if you're knitting something and then you make a mistake far down on the left, you can't just go and fix that stitch. You have to pull everything out, like that sound effect, ahead of it. Same thing on the blockchain, and that's why we want this, because you cannot have a process where someone goes in and changes their sophomore year record and grades, because the rest of the blocks ahead of it would then be disrupted and not have that same information. So it's the same thing that if someone were, and in blockchain they don't know how, but if they were to try to go in and amend an earlier record, it would be rejected, and the other computers would wake up and they would kick out that computer or that entity and say, you're trying to mess with the blockchain. You can't do that. Another one he talks about is this idea of your family tree. Well, what if you wanted to go back and say that your grandfather was not a wonderful farmer, but he was an aristocrat? Problem is there are thousands of records that followed his real life as a farmer. You'd have to go out and find all those records and change them to show that he was an aristocrat. Same thing with the blockchain. You can't go out and change below and what's above. You could only write a new record on top of that. So only the owner, in our case the private public key us, would be able to change the data. That would create the new record, and then that would be validated there. Solving a puzzle, this one is how it works. So you have, they're called nodes, but all these computers on the network, which you might imagine are all of us, every time a new record's created, so you add a new quarter or semester, you add a grade, you award a degree, you put on a behavioral annotation, the computers all wake up and they all race, and the more computers they have, the faster it will go to try to find that hash code to match the new hash code that's been written into it. And when they open it up, they say, yep, this is a new record, we all acknowledge it. A new record is then written again, and it's distributed out among all of the nodes. So right now a student can download a transcript and use graphic design tools to amend it. That won't happen in this environment, and that's exactly why we want this. So again, it's this whole idea of an immutable data store that people can't go back and change the information. And I would say, I think this is going to be even more secure than our current record mechanisms, because you can't have people go in and change things just in our home system, that centralized system, and then not have it go out on the blockchain and have people know what's going on. So even if you had a nefarious employee who wanted to change his or her son's grades or something, it's going to go out and record it out on the blockchain. So that immutable data store. Just a couple more metaphors, and then we'll step into another section here. The office gossip. It's really hard to control gossip in our office, and these computers like to gossip. As soon as they hear, hey, there's new information, again, they're going out, they're waking up, they're having this race to see who can go and open it up and solve it. And that is what is so important to us, that there's no one central point of control. And these computers act like gossip. When there's a new record, they go out and do that to update the new record. So I think that we would want a private network where it's just computers within us. It's just other universities and colleges. And then we basically become each other's validation tool instead of maybe even external. There's a whole idea of rewards and punishment, and this is where I finally wrapped my head around Bitcoin. So in the Bitcoin world, I'm going to try my best here so experts don't laugh at me. When there's a new data record created, the computers race to see who can be the first one to solve it. And the first one who solves it, if there's money associated with the transaction, it wins the purse. That's the Bitcoin. Now, there's still a validation process where the other computers are going to come back and make sure it was right. So I'm not suggesting that we use Bitcoin technology for our transcripts by any means, but we do want that computer power to be the first one to solve the hash puzzle and to make sure that everyone's writing that new record. So I want to get back to something I said earlier. It's like, well, wait, we know from surveys that ACRO has done that 50% of us, UW's one of them, depends on that $11 or $12 transcript fee to pay for travel or pay for a transcript, whatever it is. Will this take that away? And I was actually worried about that in the beginning, but no, it won't. You can still, and you still will produce transcripts, and you can still charge for them, but you may also want to get creative. Maybe for current students, they get the key because their records change more often for free, but maybe you charge alumni because they only get transcripts, they say, like 2 to 5 times in their lifetime, and that when they want, and plus they might lose the key, the hash code, maybe you charge them. So this is going to be disintermediation, intermediation. Again, it means that if students themselves can have control over their records and just can give their key to anybody else to validate, I do want to say it might cut out some of the middlemen that are in the picture now. When you get the slide deck afterwards, take a look at this, and certainly if you buy the book, I just wanted to summarize all the different metaphors and what they meant, so you can kind of get that sense of what they did. So I hope that, that was helpful to have some metaphors to kind of wrap your head around the concept of blockchain. So let's think about bringing this to the average registrar. So, oops, my little picture moved there. Excuse me. So in higher education, the credential provider, those that are providing the diplomas, the transcripts, the certificates, comprehensive learner record, it's still us, the institutions. But the verifier of that is what they call mining, or those machines that are going out and making sure that as a new record is written that it's legitimate and real, belongs to the student. That then moves to these computers. I would offer up that the owner of the credential is the student or the learner. We are not the owner of the records. We are the custodians, but it belongs to them. That's a big cultural shift. And the party to whom the credential is released is whoever the student wants to give it to, an employer, their mom, institutions, anywhere they want it to go. There is an article that I referenced here that I have you encourage you to go out and look at that's really good about why would this matter, again, in education, and just some highlights from that. Distributed over many campuses, not one. It's tamper-proof, has that timestamp for recording transactions, doesn't rely on third parties to be able to validate the process. It could be something that could be sitting on your own website with that hash code. We can imagine cutting out the middleman, much as we love them, in terms of not having to go someplace to validate that someone earned a degree once someone has that transcript or credential. Everything is by this amazing smart math. Again, works 24/7, snow days and all. That's error-free, that's going out, and either it matches or it doesn't. And it makes it so the educational available to others and not just to us. And again, that reminder that educational records don't live on the blockchain. As I've been doing this talk, I've had this slide for a long time, and I used to have 5% that this is not a technical conversation, it's a trust conversation. I used to say it's 5% technology and 95% cultural shift, and I insulted my colleagues in the technology world, did not mean to do that. Certainly there's a heavy lift, and there's a lot of knowledge, and there are schools ramping up their data science programs for this all over the place. But the point of this slide is that it is more not so much about the technology. The data scientists and the people going through and learning this, I trust they'll figure out how to make a blockchain. But it's us on this call and on this webinar and listening in that have to be willing, like I did, to trust getting that iPod or using Siri, to trust the cultural shift of what it might mean to adopt this technology. I'm asked all the time, was just asked recently on LinkedIn, what institution is actually using blockchain? We're still baby stepping our way into that. Here are a few that I would say, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, they're using it with Learning Machine to validate their diplomas. Stanford is using it to be able to validate certificates that are being offered. Was it really offered by someone at Stanford? This Wolf University is really fascinating, that it's actually the students and the faculty work in modules and tutorials, and they actually just use an app on their phone to validate that they are each other, and they even arrange payment using blockchain. That's like super science fiction. So I think more institutions will come on board, but just to let you know that I don't know that a lot of us, I've heard some people are stepping into it. If you're one of them, let me know. But this isn't something like, oh, everybody has it, we're missing out. We're still just jumping into it. So when I was asked that question by my IT colleagues, Helen, what is going to make it so that we will adopt this? I just came up with these thoughts that I want to share with you. We've got to have a trusted tipping point to lead the way. That's why I love seeing UT Austin and Stanford and MIT. Those who can go out ahead with more resources and get this going so that we can follow suit. We need sponsorship for institutional executive leadership. Let folks above you know that you're going to conferences and you're learning about this. Talk it up. Let people know it's a thing. The biggest thing, the chicken and the egg proposition that I talk about all the time, especially when it's Lumina and ACRO and we're talking to employers, is who's going to go first? Are the students going to want this? Are alumni going to want it? Employers? Someone has to have a demand for this. I think as soon as we tip over and see how easy it is to validate records, it will take off, but someone's got to move into that space. And that's why I'm hoping that you as registrars will be that voice to step into it. We've got to be able to implement this without hiring a vendor or a cadre of data scientists. So it's got to be something, and it reminds me of when I was at Lane Community College, and Jim Baus, I think, is listening. We got going in the state of Oregon on EDI. It took having a couple of us to step into that and then giving resources to other schools who didn't have the technology so they too could jump on. We need to have the same kind of thing happen here. It's got to be easy to use, and it's got to be that private community network of higher education institutions. So ACRO, forgive me because I've not vetted this by you, but I made this up, but I kind of like it. I could imagine, since we all trust ACRO so much, American Association of Collegiate Registrar Admissions Officers, that they might help us in this to kind of have a task force come together to create standards like we've done for conduct language on our transcripts and other things. So something that you would know that it has the same language, that when you want to validate something, here's the website you go to where you put in your code and you validate it. I also would hope that ACRO might be the clearinghouse, if you will, to both provide training and to kind of certify schools that they're ready to join. They've got the technology, they're set up. I mostly want that because I want to keep those diploma mills out. We don't want them to pretend like they're one of us and then get in and be able to do some of this validation. So I'd want it to go through ACRO. And then also just to endorse that we don't have to worry about FERPA because the records are not out on the network. They're still with us. FERPA is not an issue, but I think if ACRO comes in behind us and says, yeah, don't worry about it, more people will trust it. Okay, so one more time, the Imagine process, according to me. I don't get to use Dr. Gare very often, so I threw that in. So the institutional website will provide instructions for both the students, which are the credential owners, and the credential recipients, and how this process works. The credential owners of the students will get a key. They'll either purchase or be given a hash code key from the institution registrar's office, and they'll share it with whoever they want to validate either the credentials that those people have in hand or just that they have a diploma and it's correct. And those individuals will come into our website and they'll put in that hash code and it'll either light up green, yep, this matches the top record, the most current record we have, it's a valid record, or it'll go red and say, no, it's not validated. So when will we be ready for blockchain? I would say when we're ready to take on the fears of the technological unknown, we're ready and we've embraced this cultural shift, and we're going to be trusting to let those that understand the technology make it happen. And I would lend to you that, you know, we've done it before. We've trusted other people. Wanted to provide for you mostly for later a library of my favorite blockchain videos. So I won't spend a lot of time on this. We have plenty of time for questions. But this is my absolute favorite. So watch this one if you watch nothing else. Here's another one that explains it. Another one. These are just some of my favorite videos. They're all pretty short that you can just watch and really have an understanding of it. So before we head into questions, I want to just challenge you one last time. Why does it matter? Well, you know what? Actually, blockchain in terms of the 3.0 web technology may not matter. By the time we're ready for all this, maybe it's called chocolate chip cookie, I don't know. But the concept in the 3.0 web technology does matter, and I want us to embrace that. We want learners who own their records and job seekers to have control over their records to get them faster, to be able to port them and to make sure that they're accurate, and this can make that happen. We as registrars, who are very busy people, can be that catalyst because people will trust us. If we think this is trustworthy, they will look to us, and we can be the one to get it off the ground. And jobs are not going to be taken away with blockchain. We've got plenty of other things to do to serve our students besides validating credentials. So with that, Mike, I think we'll go into, looks like about 10 minutes for questions, if people have them. And wow, looks like there are some on here.
Yeah, there's been some chatter for sure. So far, though, we do have one question from Robert Bennett. And before I start, I just wanted to thank you for spending all of your time putting that together. And for everyone that's on there, I know she went through a whole bunch of information, but luckily Helen had some detailed information on most of those slides, so you can download the slide deck if you want to reference it afterward the fact or pass it along to colleagues. So Robert Bennett asks, from what I understand and reading up on the origins of blockchain technology, it was created to cut out fees from middlemen. If a school or university is to adopt blockchain for transcript verification, is there any fee for implementing or using it, or would it be free technology?
Hi, Robert. Good to hear from you. I don't know that I can perfectly answer that, but I think what I would say is, do I imagine that depending what resources we have, whether it's supported from an organization like ACRO or it's within our state systems, to actually set up the blockchain, there will be some time and resources needed to set that up. But to me, it reminds me of EDI, I guess, or something like that, where we don't have to keep paying for that technology if it's out there. So You're absolutely right that the people who created Bitcoin in the original blockchain, it was about financial transactions, and this is a little bit different. So I think that once we're up and going, much like a lot of the systems that people are familiar with now, I don't think there's going to be an ongoing cost. What Tom Black and Shelby and Mark and others, my heroes in this space, have taught me is if we as institutions can be each other's validators, then we don't need to be charging for this because we've got each other's backs and we're in this process. And although, again, we love our vendor partners down the road, we might not have to be paying fees for outsiders to help with that credentialing. I actually think, and I could be wrong, that it would be less expensive in the long run than what we're doing now.
Thank you, Helen. And we got another, as you were going through that answer there from Jonathan Graff, more of a security-related one. If a blockchain key is sold to the student as opposed to the transcript, what happens if the key inadvertently goes out to someone the student did not intend?
Yeah, excellent question. So I'm going to make something up, but I think I'm right. Do you remember I kept talking about ownership and digital signatures and thumbprints and all that kind of thing? Somehow in that process, in addition to just being able to go back and validate the record, it's going to know that it belongs to the person who's trying to do that. So forgive me because I don't know what the technology is, but if John Smith tried to pass off and use Steve Jones' transcript, because of that digital signature that's going to have to also validate that it is John Smith from University of Washington, I think that would not work if they tried to use the wrong one. The one thing I've heard people talk about, and you'll all laugh because we know how often our students lose their passwords, is that we could have a situation where we issue these hash keys in a closed system out to our students, our graduates, and they lose them. So there's going to have to be some kind of authentication, just like we do with anything else, that when they come in to recover and get a new hash code key, that we know that it's them. So my confidence is that there's that second layer of making sure that not only is this an accurate, most current record, but can I prove it actually belongs to the student who's asking.
Thanks, Alan. That's a great answer.
Thank you.
We had another one while you're going through there from Mike. Pardon if I'm saying this wrong, Amai. Can you clarify the sale of the credential key? Would access to the credential ever expire where the institution would have to charge for access again, or is it everlasting?
So from what I understand right now, and remembering that the hash key is only going to be as good as long as your records haven't changed. So I do think it's everlasting as long, because whatever the hash code that you sent to the student has to be baked in the same hash code for the top record. So if they're an alum and they haven't done anything different, they still have a degree, it's going to last. But if they're not an alum and they're an undergraduate, and when they were given the key, they hadn't been awarded their degree, if they try to use that key again, it's going to not work because they now have a new record showing that they have their degree, and they'd have to get another key. So I don't know how, just to answer your question about how would they be generated if they lose it. We do this right now all the time with giving students, what I call gobbledygook passwords that they have to use and then go in and choose another one. I'm going to trust and leave that excellent question up to our data scientists, because since this is a technology that's happening already, there must be some way that one can be regenerated by the systems. Now, when they regenerate that new hash code, a new record's going to be created, and all the nodes are going to wake up, and they're going to have a new record with that new hash code. So if someone did somehow lose their key or someone else got it, you could just create a new one, and then the old one wouldn't work. It's kind of like when you are using like a passcode to get into like PayPal. The one they sent you on the phone isn't going to work anymore because they've issued another one. My data scientist friends can check me on that, but I think I'm right. I'm thinking it will. I hope.
Yeah, and Jonathan Graff, it was kind of related to what you were just talking about, how a new hash code could be generated if a student loses the key. And as he said, hopefully data scientists can figure out how that would work exactly.
Yeah, and there are, and again, this isn't mythical science. Those that are already using this technology more in the banking space are already well figuring this out. Because imagine We're talking about major banks that don't want people to be able to go in and misuse financial transactions. So I just have confidence, and we think our student records are the most important records in the world, but imagine major corporations that have legal documents or banking records. They're going to figure this out so the wrong people can't get in and validate the wrong records.
All right, excellent. We have a question from Dennis Drinkle, and she's more asking for clarification, but blockchain is to validate a credential saying to the recipient that it is correct, i.e. a master's degree. If the recipient needs to know courses, etc., that's when we would provide a full transcript, or would that also happen through the blockchain?
Yeah, and I think it might be Denise. I think that is the excellent point, and I just had this conversation with a colleague the other day. Yes, if they want to get courses, remember the data is not out there on the blockchain. They'd still have to get a transcript. You could still sell a transcript and they had it. But when they get that transcript, think about those of you, I know many are on the line that do international or domestic transfer articulation. How cool would it be to be able to go in that even though you got that transcript, log into that university's website and make sure that it is the most current record so that you can then go ahead and articulate that work. So yeah, you would still want to get a transcript of courses if you needed to see the courses.
Thanks.
And then, so let me just go ahead with Todd's question. It's kind of the same. So I receive a transcript with a key. If I use the key but I can't see in the transcript, you have the transcript there. But all that the key would say is the information that you sent validates that, yes, this is the most current record. But again, I have to imagine if you need to know what's on a transcript, which believe me, only pretty much higher education institutions care about anymore, you would want to still have the paper transcript, but you could validate that nothing had been changed or that it hadn't been tampered with in between.
Excellent. And I'll give another minute or so for people to ask questions if they have them, because we're out of fresh ones for now. But while people are perhaps noodling on that last bit there, I just did want to quickly remind everyone that the 2019 ACRO annual meeting is coming up this March 31st through April 3rd. Our own Helen Garrett here will be presenting 6 times through workshops and sessions and all that, including on blockchain. So if you're interested in getting to meet her, meet some more colleagues that are working with blockchain in that space, it's a great place to go. And the early bird registration deadline is February 22nd, so you can take advantage of some discounted registration fees if you register before then. And from both Helen and myself, we can say that if you are planning on attending, you want to get those hotel rooms booked pretty soon.
Absolutely.
Because they are going out. Yeah. So
Mike, I just want to say one last thing to our listeners. Thank you all so much. The best thing you can do for yourself is watch those videos. It's how I learned statistics for my doctoral program. I gave you a whole bunch to look at, but they will really put it in ways that you can understand it so that when people brings it up, you have a better idea what we're talking about. So go do the Tangerine one for sure, but check out the videos, and I think that will reaffirm some of the things I'm saying for experts far more than myself. But I really appreciate your attention and humoring me, as I'm not a data scientist. I just really want this tool, and I hope that you do too.
That's great. And we did get one more question if you think you have time to answer it.
Sure.
Yeah, it's,
let me just read. The student gives their employer the key to the transcript while they're attending school. Then the student takes several more classes updating the transcript. Would the student need to issue another key? Yes. They'd have to get a new key, that new hash, because if they try to use the old one, it won't match because the record has been amended. Yeah, so there'd have to be some kind of process where you go into your institution, you authenticate who you are, you're giving a hash that matches the most current record, and then you turn around and give it to whoever wants to go in to validate. Perfect question.
All right, well, I think that'll wrap us up. It's just about 3 p.m. Eastern time here, so I want to thank you again, Helen, for presenting on this and trying to get everyone on board with the blockchain. And I want to thank our attendees today for taking the time out to view the content. And I hope you all have a good rest of the day and have had a Happy New Year so far.
Thank you, everyone, so much.